Alright, today let's take a look at why algebra shows that Jesus' true followers worship only one person as God. Often, when discussing the idea of the Trinity, or debating it, or showing why it's not really biblically sound, you can bring in several texts showing that very clear statements that God is one, that the Father is God and there's none besides him, clear statements that the Father is the only true God, and so on and so forth. And there's anyone that you're talking to, or if you're just listening to this for the first time, there's always going to be a bunch of texts in the back of your mind that sound like they support the doctrine of the Trinity, and you'll say, well, what about this text? What about this text? What about this text? And, well, first off, just think about those texts for a second. Pretty much every text that is said to support the doctrine of the Trinity doesn't actually state it. There's actually no clear statement of the Trinity in the Bible anywhere. All the texts that sound like they're supporting it never really clearly state that, and they're ambiguous. There's alternative interpretations, and I'm not going to get into those here, but because when you're going down trying to look at each of those texts, it's kind of like being lost in the forest, and you get mired down into all these individual texts, and it's sometimes, if you're not willing to take the hours and hours needed to, then you'll just dismiss the whole idea that, well, the Trinity is part of our church tradition, so we gotta believe it. And you'll never see the forest for the trees. So let's just, for this video, instead of looking at individual texts, I'm just going to take a step back and look at the forest, the big picture. In algebra, we have what's called the transitive property of equality. This means that if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Alright, and this is the truth. This is absolute truth. It's irrefutable. So what is the equivalent here? Well, A equals B. Anyone that's a true follower of Jesus is going to adhere to the same basic doctrines that Jesus taught. Most importantly, they're going to worship the same God, have the same understanding of God that Jesus held, if you're going to be a true follower of Jesus. So that's A equals B. Now B equals C. Jesus was a Jew. All of the disciples were Jews. The early followers of the Jesus movement were also mostly Jews, and for the first few decades, this Jesus movement was not considered to be a separate religion known as Christianity, but was in fact a branch of Judaism. Now, there can be a fair amount of variety of ideas and stuff within Judaism, both for the fact that Judaism has evolved a fair amount since the first century, and also even within both the first century and today, there's a fair amount of variety within it. But there are certain things that there's like a certain core beliefs that if you step outside of this, then you are no longer part of Judaism. The most important being, who do you worship? Who is God? What is your understanding of God? Now, when I was a Trinitarian, I knew that Judaism didn't really have the doctrine of the Trinity. I assumed the way I reconciled that was, first, I was completely ignorant of Judaism. I assumed that they just had a vague notion of one God, and that when Jesus came, this understanding of this who God is was made more clear, and was made clear there was one being and three persons, and so on and so forth. That's not true at all. Judaism is actually very clear on who God is. And look up any book on Judaism, talk to any rabbi, they'll tell you that Judaism very clearly teaches that God is one single person, and that this one single person has no form. He's not a man, he's not born a man, he does not die, so on and so forth. It's actually a very clear understanding of God. And the doctrine of the Trinity contradicts most of the key aspects of who Judaism teaches God is. Judaism says that God is one single person. Trinitarianism says that it's three persons. Judaism teaches that God has no form. Trinitarianism teaches that one of these three persons has a form. Judaism teaches that God is not a man. Trinitarianism teaches that God became a man. Judaism teaches that God is not the son of man. In other words, not born a man. Trinitarianism teaches that one of these three persons was born a man. Judaism teaches that God cannot die. Trinitarianism teaches that God died. I mean, it's like, basically it's tailored to contradict most of the things that Judaism teaches about God. And so there's basically three possibilities. One, that a true follower of Jesus will not believe in the Trinity. Two, is the possibility that the Trinity is true, but Jesus rejected the doctrines of Judaism concerning God, which means that Jesus would have rejected Judaism as a whole, and the Jewish prophets like Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Jesus would have rejected all of them and considered them to be false prophets. Of course, we know that didn't happen. But that would be that if the Trinity was true, then you would have to reject Judaism as a false religion, even up to the point where Jesus came. The other one would be, well, what if the Trinity was true, but Judaism originally taught the Trinity up into the 1st century and then later changed? The problem with that is all of the historical evidence says that did not happen. All of the historical evidence shows that Judaism never taught the Trinity. So if you just look at the big picture, what you're really saying is that there's really just these three possibilities. One, the Trinity is false, and the true followers of Jesus do not believe in the Trinity. Two, and if the Trinity is true, then either Judaism, even up until the 1st century, was a false religion, or Judaism originally taught the Trinity, which all of the historical evidence says it never did. Let me just end by reading something written by one of a very interesting church historian. Now, this is from the book, The Birth of Jesus and the Lost Teachings of Christianity by Jeffrey Boots. And in this book, he writes, as abundant evidence has shown us, after Jesus' crucifixion, his family and disciples continued to worship together in the temple in Jerusalem, manifesting no difference from their fellow Jews except in their belief that Jesus was the Davidic Messiah. Unfortunately for these harmonious beginnings, Pauline Christianity, and here he's not speaking bad about Paul himself, but rather talking about the primary followers of Paul, which would be largely Gentiles that came into the faith. Pauline Christianity increasingly adopted an understanding of Jesus that Judaism could not ultimately bear. The Hellenistic theological belief that Jesus was literally God incarnate in human flesh. Why does he refer to this as a Hellenistic belief? It's because this idea that God becomes a man is very common in paganism, but never appears in Judaism. It's not part of the Jewish tradition at all. Never was. Yeah. If you look at where does it come from, it comes from paganism. And just as an aside, I've had some people, when this was pointed out, that paganism has doctrines of God incarnate and even some trinities and stuff, they'll say, oh, well, Satan was just trying to trick people by providing these ideas into the pagan faith before the real God incarnate came and all that stuff. The problem with that idea is that it would be saying that Satan was teaching more truth about who God is than God was teaching. That's not an idea that I can support. So, anyways, back to the quote here. As the doctrine of the Incarnation became ever more central to the Gentile Catholic Christianity, an impassable theological wall arose between Jews and Christians. And he continues on. The doctrine of the Incarnation is also the great wall that separates Muslims and Christians. Most Christians today are completely unaware that Muslims highly revere Jesus and honor his teachings. They even believe in the virgin birth. But, like the Jewish cousins, the strict monotheism of Islam could never accept the key Christian dogmas of the Incarnation and the Holy Trinity. And if you look at the Islamic understanding of God, it very much lines up with what Judaism teaches about who God is. They line up quite well together. Unlike Christianity with the doctrine of the Trinity. Continuing, it is therefore potentially significant for the interreligious dialogue today that one of the firm conclusions of modern research into James, which is the brother of Jesus, has revealed that neither Jesus' family, nor the apostles, nor his Jewish disciples believed that Jesus was literally God. They believed that Jesus was the Davidic Messiah, adopted by God as his, quote, son, unquote, at his baptism by John, but still a human being. That the earliest Christian doctrine was in no way incompatible with Jewish doctrine is evidenced, above all, by the fact that the Jews in Jerusalem continued to accept Jesus' followers as fellow Jews. In fact, they saw them as being particularly rigorous and pious Jews. It is more than intriguing that the Muslim understanding of Jesus is very much in conformity with the first Christian orthodoxy, the original Jewish Christian understanding of Jesus. As already noted, this is no coincidence, for in his extensive travels prior to receiving his first revelation from Allah, Muhammad had numerous contacts with various 7th century Jewish Christian sects in the northwestern perimeter of the Arabian Peninsula. It would seem that their views on Jesus strongly influenced Muhammad's understanding of Jesus. And this is a Christian writer saying this. But I highly recommend reading the book. It's very good there. But this is kind of the big picture. Either, if you're wanting to accept Jesus and truly follow him, you'll either reject the Trinity, or if you're going to say that the Trinity is true, then you are literally saying that either Judaism was a false religion, or you're making the extraordinary claim that Judaism originally taught the Trinity, which all of the historical evidence says it never did. So, anyways, but yeah, in other videos and other materials, I go in depth into particular verses and stuff. But for this one, I just wanted to step back and look at the force, look at the big picture. Thank you.